Okay, we're going to look at 2A and 2B on our Skill 1 homework. So for 2A and 2B, remember it says to factor first. So let me do each of them in a different color so we can see them clearly. So this function, when they say factor, they're really talking about that B value compared to that X minus H value. So you see a B of 2, an H of 2, an A of 2, and a K of 1. So the B of 2 is a horizontal compression by 1/2. The H of 2 is a shift right 2. The A of 2 is a vertical stretch by 2. And the K of 1 is a shift up 1. So remember, we do our stretching and compressing and reflecting before we do any of our shifting. So I'm going to take each of the points I have marked. I'm kind of using them for reference, and I'm going to do the horizontal compression first so you can see what those would look like. And then I'll move on to something else. So the horizontal compression would take the horizontal distance and cut it in half. So this point is at 5 horizontally away from the axis. It would change to a position of 2.5. This point is 4 away from the axis. It would change to a position of 2. This point is directly on the axis, so it won't be compressed because it's already 0 units away, so we'll keep that point. This point is 1 unit away from the axis, so it will be compressed back towards it to 1/2. This point is 4 units away. It would be compressed back to 2. So at this point, if that was the only transformation we had, our graph would look like this. Now, the next step of this graph is going to be to vertically stretch it by 2. So now we're going to look at vertical distances and double them. So this point is at 0. It's going to stay at 0. This point is 2 units below the x-axis. If we double that distance, it's going to make it 4 units below the x-axis. Now erase that. This point here was 4 units above the x-axis. It's now going to be 8 units above the x-axis. This point was 1 unit above the x-axis. It's now going to be 2 units above the x-axis. And this point was 3 units below the x-axis. It will now be 6 units below the x-axis. So now you can see that stretch that occurred to make our graph look like this. Now I'm going to do the 2 shifts together, just because they're a little bit less confusing to me. So our shifting is right 2, up 1. So every point on my graph is going to go right 2, up 1. So that's where that first point ends up. This point is going to go right 2, up 1. This point up here is going to go right 2, up 1. This point here is going to go right 2, up 1. And this point down here is going to go right 2, up 1. So now we would see that final graph. And then we would go ahead and put in the domain and range. So you can see the x value now is from -1/2 is the furthest left and 4 is to the right. And for our vertical values, we see -5 and it goes up to +9. Okay, now we're going to go through and we're going to do the same thing for part B. So I'm going to erase my answer to part A just so we can clearly kind of go through part B. And again, I'm going to start with the points I have marked on my graph because I'm using those for reference. And I'm going to go through the transformations. Now, the transformations for this graph are going to be a little bit different. So this changes to factor out that negative. It's an x minus 3. So we have a negative outside the parentheses. So the a value is negative, which is a reflection over the x-axis. We also have a B value that's negative, which is a reflection over the y-axis. And then we have an H value of 3, which is a shift right 3. So I'm going to take the points circled on the graph. I'm going to first apply the reflections. So I'm going to reflect them in both ways. So this first point, to reflect over the x-axis, it stays. To reflect over the y-axis, it would come over to positive 5. This second point, to reflect over the x-axis, it would be up here. Then to reflect over the y-axis would be over here. For this third point, to reflect over the x-axis would drop down to -4. And since it's on the y-axis, it won't reflect there. For this fourth point, to reflect over the x-axis would be to put it down here. To reflect over the y-axis would be to shift it over here. And then lastly, for this point, to reflect over the x-axis would take it up to +3. And then to reflect over the y-axis would take it over to -4. So here is our graph reflected. So now we're going to go ahead and write down the domain and range of that. Oh, actually, we haven't done our shifting yet. So we're going to go back and do our shifting. Apologize. So we're going to shift everything to the right 3 now. So then we have this final graph, and we can list its domain and range. So the domain for this graph, the x values go from -1 at this point to 8, and the range goes from -4 up to +3.